is becoming, I don't know what you think about this, but I mean, for me, I gotta say, I admit, I go on Amazon, if I want to buy like a, electronic something or other, I'll look at the reviews and see how many stars did it get. And I think the same is true with books. People are figuring out, okay, if a book's got 800 4- and 5-star reviews, all right, there's probably something there. If it's got 3 reviews that are 3 stars, there's probably something there too. Something wrong there. So I think those are, sort of the, I'm rambling now, I'm sorry. But I'd say, okay, so as far as, so I gave the process, I think, for getting a traditional publisher, getting an agent, going in that direction. Independent publishing, you can do it yourself. One of the keys is to make sure that the package is very professional, really good cover. You absolutely need to get a professional copy editor because, your buddy who's got a really good eye for editing ain't gonna cut it. You need a professional who can do that.
So I guess my question would be, where do you think is the right point in someone's career where you should be self-publishing? Do you think it's something you should do when you're just starting out, or should you try to establish yourself first?
That's a really tough question. A lot of people have said to me, well, of course, it's not surprising that you were successful independently publishing because you already have readership. Which is true to some degree, but I have to say I get a lot of emails from people who say, I loved your Viking books, now I'm going to go back and read the other stuff. So people who did not know me prior to that. I don't know if there necessarily is one good way to do it. I think if I was starting out today, because it is so hard to be heard when you're independent publishing, it's so hard to make yourself stand out, I think I would probably still go the traditional route the first time around, and then go from there. And I think maybe I would even think about doing both, being a hybrid, publishing traditionally and independent publishing at the same time. There used to be among the traditional publishers, one of the many, many mistakes that they made was believing that readers would not buy more than 1 book from an author in a year. So traditionally, they would only put out 1 book a year by any given author. And if you're writing a novel, if you're doing it full time, you can do it in 6 months. I actually started writing under a pen name at one point because I was so far ahead of my publisher. But independent publishers have realized that that's nonsense. People, if you like an author, you're going to buy his books as fast as they put them out. So independent publishers are doing 2 or 3 books a year. I'm doing at least 2 books a year now, and they're selling. And I think the traditional publishers are catching on to that, and they're starting to put out books a little more frequently. So I'm rambling again. I don't know where the hell we started on this. I guess, we're asking where you start. I think I would do both avenues at the same time. I would try to get a traditional publishing deal, and I would try to independently publish.
I think that's very sensible advice. I don't want Ryan to feel like he's left out in the cold here. So I'm very curious about...
I can still, actually, Zach's question about how to get in.
Yes.
If any of you were to apply at enough places right now, every single one of you could get a job doing what I did. On a different subject, but 100%, easily done. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. There's because freelancers are paid on completion of the work, not necessarily for just being around, sites have no issues hiring as many as possible. So most of you could probably get a gig doing this.
Now, when you say hired, I know traditionally in magazine publishing, you'd write an article, you'd submit it, and you try to get the editor to buy it.
So yeah, there's a couple different ways to get into it. Like, you can apply to work as a freelancer without a subject in mind, or you can have a completed work that you're trying to pitch. And there are very different ways to try to get into it, and I would say that the former is more successful than the latter, especially where I work. If someone comes to us with, here's something I wrote, it's basically going to be a blanket now, because we have a style guide. So because whatever it is would need to be rewritten to fit with the way we present information, our formatting, the way we cite things. So we don't really care what you're coming in with. We just need warm bodies to write the endless new list that is news items that we constantly have to cross off items on because there aren't enough people to do.
Okay. So when you said being hired as a freelancer, what does that mean, like contractually?
Uh,
Anything?
Not much really.
Okay.
It just means they give you access to their CMS, their content management system, so we make Word CMS or another backend, and you write in a box, you submit it for review, and then it gets published.
So you would go to one of these sites and say, I want to
Yeah.
hire as a freelancer. And they would say, okay, we're going to hire you, here's access to our style and everything.
Basically.
And then you're writing and
Well, I mean,
submitting.
there's almost always training because, like I said, I for our site I put together all of our training docs, and I do a lot of the hiring and the training process now because all of the documentation that we use to train people I wrote. So I'm pretty familiar with the training process, and it can be extensive depending on the person. But usually you're up and publishing something with perhaps tremendous oversight within a day. Sometimes that work ends up to be 4 hours of work for me for the 20 minutes of work you did.
So, I mean, are there circumstances where someone is going to apply for a job and you're going to say no?
Yeah, and that's why I would say that if you really want to do it, you should apply to as many places as possible, because a lot of places aren't hiring. Some of the places that are hiring, they're only hiring for people in specific beats, so it's important that you be familiar with a certain subject. Places like Mobile Nations that run a whole suite of sites are always hiring freelancers because they need people to write everything. There's news, there's SEO optimized search garbage. So they'll look at like Reddit posts and see the most popular or upvoted questions on a given subject in the comments list, and they'll write a whole article around that question because they assume if people are asking it at a venue like that, people are also searching similar terms, and they're just trying to create content that shows up in search on the first page.
Inspiring.
Yeah, I would never want to do stuff like that. It's soul crushing.
What blogs are publishing daily posts about Vikings in 8th century Ireland?
Yeah.
Just
This is fascinating. This is like opening up a cover and seeing a whole world that I didn't even know existed.
oh yeah, and a lot of it's really like the SEO optimized stuff is I mean, it's big business, and it's bigger than I am. It's a much bigger business than the stuff I do, but it's garbage. Nobody wants to do that. People doing it don't want to do it.
So I guess, and then what would you say is exactly the goal as a tech writer? Are you trying to, are you like consuming reports telling people what is and what isn't good, or are you just doing reviews, safety, explanation of products?
Sometimes. A little bit of everything, yeah. So I imagine at other sites that have more people and therefore more specialization, it might work differently. But generally I pitch to my managing editors, or more frequently people pitch to me, something that they want to write on a given subject. It's non-news. So we have a list of news items, and we have a list of non-news items, things like editorials, how-to guides, explainers. A lot of people don't understand how specific things work when it comes to tech, and sometimes just this is how this works does really well, because people just, they don't know and they would like to know. But there's more to it than news for sure. And stuff like reviews, if you want to review phones, that you have to really work your way up to and build a reputation for.
Because everyone wants to do that.
Everybody wants free stuff, yeah. And once you get to a certain level, the free stuff is not the draw. Like, I have things I would prefer to get rid of that I have to keep in my apartment because I need them for testing purposes. But it's like, oh, this is another laptop I have to look at, or another Chromebook, and it's going to take up space in my apartment, and I don't want it, but I need to do it.
Wow, so if I were to review yachts,
Actually, how to make a living as a writer.
So some of my coworkers and I are trying to do the same thing because we're like, we could buy it just as easily as we could review it. Sometimes we have to buy things rather than get sent them for free. It happens. Though usually we get it for free. So we actually just started a site called taxdeductiblebeer.com.
Appreciate the choice of title.
Yeah. I feel like it was explanatory.
So what kind of stuff do they send you? Do you review mostly laptops, you said? I know.
Oh no, I do phones occasionally. I'm our expert for power accessories because I like making batteries explode. Yeah.
Do you have like a certain room in your house where you dedicate to battery explosions?
I probably should.
Do the local authorities, are they familiar with you?
Not yet.
Try to keep it that way.
Yeah, I gotta say, it's interesting, you're talking about all this writing that has to be done, and I was talking about how the internet and Netflix and all these guys have had such a negative impact in the publishing industry, but I think really, to a large extent, it's a very exciting time to be a writer, because even though a lot of the traditional ways of publishing are going away, there are so many more taking its place. And I think, my son, who's interested in writing novels, is also interested in getting into television production. I think that's just wicked exciting. There's so much great stuff. I don't even read anymore because there's so much great stuff being produced, on Netflix and Showtime and all the, it's really great. I mean, I think it's a good time to be a writer right now.
Yeah.
I was going to ask, what are you reading recently? But actually, my question is this, because you're sort of sitting here in the student audience, I would like these folks to be able to imagine ways that they can approach others for assistance, to be generous enough to give others the opportunity to help them. So I want to ask, what are some ways, if any ways, other writers were a help to you as you try to make this more of your livelihood and not just your passion?
Go ahead.
I mean, we help each other a lot. Even people like people at competing sites that you'd think there'd be some kind of vicious rivalry. I mean, we're competing for clicks, but we understand that to a certain degree it just comes down to lottery. Like the Google Feed stuff, when they choose you for the carousel, sometimes it ends up being pseudo-random. So we don't have, with a couple of exceptions, we don't have a whole lot of animosity between each other. And there oftentimes people at other sites are quite willing to help if they know something about a subject and you don't, and you need like a little thing explained to you or something like that. So there's a lot of collaboration that happens. And obviously within the framework of our own site, I'm an editor, so if any of our contributors come to me and they're like, I need help with this, like, I help.
Okay, yeah, I suspect that what you do is much more collaborative than what I do. People are writing books are pretty much locked up in their own little offices for months at a time, getting pale and pasty. So in that regard, I don't. I have friends who are writers, and that's always it's always a nice thing to be able to commiserate and bitch about how awful it is to be a writer. But no, I mean it is nice because there is sort of a unique set of problems that you deal with as a writer, and it is nice to have fellows that you can bounce these issues off of and talk about. And the isolation is part of it. The fact that you're sitting there alone for so much of the time, and issues like that. So it's nice to have that fellowship when you can have it. In terms of help, I certainly, even though I was saying that I was talking before about not really needing any kind of academic background, but I have had a few English professors who've been very, very helpful in terms of insight into what real writing is and what makes good literature. So that's been a real help to me. And certainly people have given me advice career-wise along the line about how to, which is one of the reasons I really enjoy doing stuff like this, and why if anyone ever emails me for advice on how to get ahead in the writing industry, I try to be as helpful as I can because people have been very helpful to me in the past. I try to remember that. And that's why I always give people blurbs when they ask, even though most readers know that it's just BS. It's just writers helping each other, which is really true. But
one thing that it didn't occur to me to say is that a large part of like news writing, the blogging, whatever you want to call it, is not actually writing. Writing is most of the job, but it's not all of the job. And so there are a lot of ways you can make yourself more attractive to sites and increase the amount of money you make by being good at things like Photoshop. Like I spent a long time in college playing with GIMP, which is a terrible program that none of you should use. Just learn Photoshop. Because I pay for Photoshop now and I still use GIMP. But just being able to, every post needs graphics associated with it. That's the current format now is you have a title and you have to have a graphic. Nothing gets published with just a title and text unless you're the New York Times and it's a short article. If you're online, you need a photo. You need graphics of some kind. If you can generate your own, as opposed to having to rely upon either the library of the site or a paid library like Getty Images, then you really increase your attractiveness. So if you can generate like even mediocre quality graphics, that is a big deal, and you should have it on your resume if you apply for freelance work because it's very useful.
So like how to make a living as a writer is, well, not a lot of the writing. So sort of reminds me of David Green downstairs, who some of us were talking to, is also a writer, novelist, and short story author. And something that didn't come up in earlier sessions about how to get your writing published is, we talked a lot about the hustle and social media and email and so on, but David Green privately was like, did you mention the sacrifice and the suffering and the privation and the failure and the humiliation? Is there an emotional aspect of writing as a full-time profession or as most of your livelihood that you've had to learn how to overcome? Are you living monastic lives? Is it part of failure and rejection? Is it humiliating in some way?
Probably more so for you.
Monastic and humiliating.
Jim?
Yeah, I just read this thing on Facebook the other day. Someone posted, it said, if you give a man a book, you entertain him for a day. If you teach a man to write a book, you condemn him to a lifetime of self-doubt. Crippling self-doubt. So, there's definitely that. I think certainly with every book, when you spend so long working on it and get so close to it, there comes a point where you're certain that it's absolute garbage. And I've heard this from many, many writers, not just myself. You get too close to it, and I think a lot of writers tend to abandon their work at that point. And I think one of the things that makes someone a viable professional is if they can fight their way through that and recognize, okay, I saw merit in this at one point, and I think there's still merit in it, even though I'm sick of it. So there's certainly that. There's no question that you need a thick skin, particularly with so much sales online. We're talking about reviews, and invariably you're going to get flamed, and you're going to get people who are going to say nasty, nasty things about your book, and it's tough. I like to pretend that it doesn't bother me, but it really does. I've seen a lot of wannabe writers who will write a book and it's almost ready for publishing, but they got to do a little more work to it, and it still needs a little more tweaking, but they're going to get it out there soon, and they can keep doing this forever. Because really, when you finish a book and you put it out there, it's a tacit admission that this is now the best book that I can write. And if it sucks, that's the best I can do. And that's a big ego exposure. That's a tough thing to do. And I've seen a lot of people avoid that step by always tweaking their book and never actually putting it out there. So yeah, there's no question. You're definitely exposing yourself. And it's hard to do. And I think that's why a lot of people don't write books, because they don't want to take that risk. There's certainly a certain degree of toughness that's required, a willingness to suffer any potential humiliation. And it is just, he's absolutely right. There's a lot of, and I think the other thing that you could say is, we talk about promotion and getting books out there. The most important thing is to write a damn good book. That's the important thing, is writing a book that people want to read. That really is, and that's one thing I haven't said yet. But ultimately, that's what it's really all about. If you can't do that, then nothing else matters. So certainly the craft of writing the book is so very crucial, and taking as much time as you need and making it right. That just takes a lot of hard work, just sitting alone in a room, reading it and writing it and playing with it. So there's a lot to be done even before you even start thinking about selling the book.
I guess the question that I have is, do you feel like you're still kind of learning as authors? So
Yeah,
would you say
definitely.
you're still working on your craft?
Yeah.
Other than like plot.
Absolutely. Oh yeah, no question at all. And that's where a lot of the reading comes in, and seeing how other authors do this, and sort of seeing how. I write essentially genre fiction, and it's very easy to just kind of fall into doing the same thing over and over again. So that's one of the things that I'm always trying to defend against, is trying to find new ways to, there's a sword fight in every book I write. So it takes, at a certain point, I got to think of a different way to describe it. And so I'm, so I'm always trying to think in those terms, and how can we make it different. And, I think
touch on something you mentioned a little bit ago. Yep, there's also a lot of hate that you get as a
All
news writer.
that.
Yeah, like we get vitriolic messages pretty regularly. I have a wall behind my computer, the wall. I pin the most like interesting or fascinating personal attacks I get on the wall. So that I can see them like, what was this person even thinking? I don't understand.
I'll bet it's much worse for people who do your type of
It gets pretty bad, and I'm pretty lucky because I am not too. I don't know how to describe this accurately. I am a white guy, so I don't get it that bad. But my coworkers who are not get it a lot worse. So there's like.
You mean like women or?
Women or people of color or
Really?
yeah, absolutely. Like there's some real nasty stuff that gets said out there.
Really?
Yes, absolutely.
So you're saying that people attack you personally, not just your work?
A little bit of both, yeah, absolutely. And I don't even get it that bad. I only get it if I have like an editorial that got a whole lot of views. Like if like an editorial gets 300,000 views, I know that I'm probably going to get, because that means I'm taking a stance on something, I'm going to get a couple of angry messages from people who violently disagree and feel that their opinion as a person on the internet is just as valid as mine. But again, I get it lucky. A lot of people out there are real douchebags, and they will attack people on other bases that are not merited.
This is a question for Jim. Do you ever feel pressured by your readers to write about the same?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I had an editor once years ago who said that every book has got to be different, but not too different. You know? and it's true. Because readers read my books because they like these type of books. A few years ago, I wrote a modern day thriller where the protagonist was a lobsterman from the coast of Maine, which is a book I've always wanted to write. I really like those books, and frankly, I thought it was a pretty good book. And most people who read it thought it was a pretty good book, but it did not sell all that well. And part of it is because the people who read my books read them because they like historical fiction. They don't read them because they are in love with James L. Nelson. It's because they like the kind of books I write. So yeah, I definitely, if I were to do that again, I would probably do it under a pen name if I were to write a completely different genre. So yeah, I think I cannot be commercially viable if I stray too far away from my niche.
Are you kind of appreciative of that, or does it ever make you feel sort of boxed in that you have this niche that you're playing to?
That's an interesting question. I don't. I obviously like the genre very much, or I wouldn't have started writing in that. So in that respect, I don't. I certainly, one of the reasons I wrote this modern day book is because I do get a little tired of, I've written 25 books. About 20 of which are novels. So yeah, it'd be nice to branch out a little. I do wish I could. But for the most part, I like the genre. So I don't feel too annoyed that I can't stray too far from it.
We have time left for a couple more questions, so I don't want to stifle any ideas if there are questions out there in the audience.
So, Jim, you write nonfiction as well. Do the people, is there, talking about what is expected, is there like a sort of expected fictional sort of look into the nonfiction that people have?
I think that the readerships are pretty different. I don't, I hear from a lot of people who say, I only read fiction, or I only read nonfiction, or there's not a lot of crossover, which I think is why one of the reasons there's not a lot of writers who cross over. So I don't think that there's that expectation, but I wrote at least 10 novels before I ever wrote my first nonfiction. And I think that was actually very beneficial because writing novels taught me how to structure a book and to make the pacing work, to make it move along. I didn't know this at first, but when you write nonfiction, you can't make stuff up. And it's really a burden. So But you can, you can structure a book when like I did this book about Benedict Arnold and his attack, the Northern Campaign of the Revolution, 1775, and the fighting on Lake Champlain. And so I can, okay, I got Benedict Arnold here, and we're following him, and he gets to this, sort of cliffhanger point, and we cut away to the British and what they're doing here. And it's all, it's scrupulously accurate. I'm very careful in my research, but I can still structure the nonfiction storyline in such a way that I use novelistic devices to keep the plot moving. And people will tell me, "Gee, your nonfiction reads just like a novel." It's like, yeah, that's what I'm going for. So in that respect, I do like to use those tools, but there's not a lot of crossover. In fact, the technique of writing is very different. When I'm writing a novel, I pretty much start at page 1 and just write straight through. And I started doing that writing nonfiction and realized that it absolutely doesn't work. When I write nonfiction, it's history. So like in this instance, I've got Benedict Arnold doing this, I've got the British doing this, I've got George Washington doing this. And what I realized that I had to do is just like write all the Benedict Arnold stuff and then all the British stuff and then just sort of cut and paste it and assemble it, because there's so much you have to hold in your head while you're doing that. You can't switch back and forth. So just the technique is very, very different, and that took some learning.
I guess the same question goes for Ryan, because I know you write fiction too. Do those two worlds ever combine?
I mean, I write very little fiction. Yeah, I know you saw like the one thing. Yeah, I do very little. I just really I read a ton of sci-fi. I love sci-fi. So every once in a while, I try to make some, but that's I don't. Not like him. It's not. I don't do anything with that.
This question is more for Ryne. So with news writing, you mentioned how some people kind of make personal attacks. I would say that that's not obviously not good. But would you say that you do tech writing, but if you write something that's more like politically oriented, that some debate that some debate is almost like healthy for journalism?
Absolutely, yeah. Especially especially if it's on an editorial. I feel like if you're presenting something that is entirely opinion, the whole point is to be able to defend and present and turn that opinion into a dialogue with people who might sometimes disagree. Sometimes it's not worth the time to have that dialogue. Sometimes it is, especially if enough people take the other stance. Sometimes the editorial can spill over into comments, but and every once in a while, because our site lets us, we get to take an editorial stance on the news to advance what we consider to be the objective truth against people who might prefer alternative truths. And so sometimes that spills over into the same sort of deal, where you just have to expect that certain political people with certain beliefs will jump into your comments section.
So do you find that most of the comments are sort of rational, reasoned, or they're not all just sort of vicious?
No.
Yeah.
There are very few well-reasoned
Really,
comments.
most of them are just sort of...
No, they're all trash. Mostly trash.
I feel like that's kind of par for the course of the internet. I can think of one intelligent, well-reasoned argument I've ever seen on Facebook, and it was between two friends of mine who attend Columbia University in the city of New York. And other than that, everything else has been bad.
Yeah, every once in a while, someone who's like an expert in something will jump in comments, and you can have a genuinely interesting discussion. Or if you have regulars, you get to know the people who regularly appear in your comment section, and you can actually talk with them like normal human beings, like we are. But generally speaking, more than 90% of it is just garbage.
Are you allowed to kind of interact in the comment section? You're able to.
Oh, most sites will require you to interact in the comments section. Depending on where you work, you can change how you're allowed to interact. We're allowed to be kind of dismissive if we want to be, because we get some real douchebags. But
I have one more question for James.
Yeah.
So, the nature of your writing, do you think that this kind of niche helps you, or is it a detriment? Because I guess in some of my writing, I do really immersive writing, so I try to do a lot of research when I'm writing, but it's fictional, but it's, I wouldn't say it's historical fiction, but it's very grounded in reality.
Yeah.
Do you think that this is helpful, or are people like, what is it?
As far as the
Like getting readership, I guess. Like, are people interested in the?
Yes, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. That's one of the main reasons that people read my books is because they're fascinated by this time period, and they expect, I think, to learn something, which is why I think it's absolutely essential that even a writer of fiction be very meticulous about the research and the authenticity. Yeah, I'm I'm as careful about that in my fiction as I am in my nonfiction. And I think that getting those historical facts right and feeling comfortable in the time period lends a certain authenticity to the work. And it gives the reader more trust in the author and willing to buy into the story that they're telling. Yeah, no, I think it's enormously important research. It's very, very important. And it's, it's funny how this works, because I've written fiction set during the American Civil War, during the Revolution. And the Civil War, there's unbelievable amounts of research material. I mean, there are photographs and everything. There's so much. In fact, the first novel that I wrote ended up being like 900 pages because there was like so much good stuff. I couldn't cut it out. It was terrible. I had to go and hack all this out. But now, when you're getting back into the early Middle Ages, which I'm writing about now, there's not very much material at all, which is both a curse and a blessing. On the one hand, I'm less constrained because we just don't know much. But on the other hand, a lot of it is speculation. And not just on my part, I read. When I do research, I realize that even the people writing these histories don't know an awful lot. So yeah, it's,
So it's like, it would be a good idea to not advertise, but like mention that, like this is like research based in some way, or like some kind of.
I don't know if, it's hard to say that. I think, I've never actually explicitly said that.
Yeah.
I think that I try to make it clear in the work that, I try to give it that sort of sense of authenticity that comes through to the reader without having to sort of explicitly state that. I mean, certainly, like I can tell, like in my nonfiction, I can always tell the sophisticated readers because the first thing they'll do is flip through the bibliography and see what sources I used, And I think, like, if you were writing fiction, and particularly if you were using research libraries and that type of thing, mentioning them in the acknowledgments would be an excellent thing, thanks to the BU library or the Huntington library or whatever you used. And that not only is a courtesy to the people who've helped you, but it also is definitely a signal to the reader that you've done your homework on this. Could I ask what time period you're working with?
A lot. I'm working right now in like the late 70s
Okay.
in the Midwest.
Okay.
I'm writing a story, but I'm also writing something that's set in Paris in the 90s.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm really all over the place.
Oh, that's cool. That's great. Yeah, yeah. You see, now that's when you're dealing with something like the 70s, you got to be careful because there were actually some people alive today who were there.
Exactly. Yeah, I know. So I gotta be accurate because they really know because they lived it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I was just watching some movie or something that was set in the 70s, and someone said something like, "Is that really a thing?" And I think, no.
So, a lot of things asking my parents about stuff too.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good.
Time for maybe one more question. Anyone?
This one's for James actually. Did you have to deal with failure at any point, like when you were beginning? Like I know I attended a conference once and this author said he had failed 44 times, and that was his Ryan Sanderson actually is pretty popular, and so I thought, Jesus Christ, how do you keep going on 44 times? I don't know.
I have to say, I was saying before that I was very fortunate, and I really was, in terms of the timing of my book. It took me 2 years to write my first book. I wrote the whole thing and realized it was awful and shut the whole thing and rewrote it. But that second book was actually the one that I sold, and that's a really rare thing. And I've wondered to myself how much patience I would have had if I'd had to suffer through rejection after rejection. I like to think that I would have kept at it until I got through. It's certainly reasonable to think that you're going to write 2 or 3 books before you ever sell one. And honestly, I get survivor's guilt when I think about it. Why me? Why did I get so lucky? But I've had plenty of rejections since then. I've had publishers like that Viking book, for instance, that I self-published. We shot that everywhere. Where I just I got a contract with W.W. Norton for a nonfiction book, and spent a year and a half writing the thing. And when I submitted it, they said, "No, we changed our mind. We don't want it." So okay, there's a year and a half of my life gone. And not only that, they said, "Oh, we want our advance back." So we're still fighting with them over that. So yeah, no, I definitely. But it's part of that thick skin thing I was talking about. You really just have to be able to deal with that. It's not for people with fragile egos.
Even my editors do not give delicate feedback, even if I'm reading it.
Okay, I'm sure.
Well, I believe that is the time we have. Thank you so much, both of you.
Oh,
Thank you.
Where can we sign up for your mailing list as well?
www.jameslnelson.com is my website. And seriously, if any of you have any follow-up questions or anything like that you want to ask, please feel free to email me. You can email through the website. I'd be delighted to help in any way that I can.
TaxDeductiblebeer.com.
That's right, yeah.
If anyone would like sandwiches, please feel free to stop by the room on the first floor to do so. Thank you very much.
That was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Oh, cool. You're part of the BookLab? I want to introduce you guys.
Feeding me well.
And you can email me as well.
What's
the role you go to? Ryne is BU BookLab. Dean Nelson is the Dean of the Congress. Is a student graduating. Rose is a student graduating. Feel free to make some connections with him as well. And if you ever want to grab a coffee,
But yeah,
it was helpful.
very usually see these opportunities. I feel like
How much is that for you? We're going to try to make something happen.